Hey, welcome to Dead Presidents Club. I got Joshua Johnson here once again to talk about all things. Joshua, welcome.
Hey, welcome.
How are you?
Hey, by the way.
What
is the craziest thing that you think could happen at a Dave Matthews concert?
Well, it's funny you should ask, actually. We were just talking before the show about my claim to fame being that I accidentally partied with Johnny Depp at a Dave Matthews concert.
Now, I just want to stop you right there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people imagine things that aren't true when they're at a Dave Matthews concert.
Okay, fair enough.
Due to contact high.
Yes, fair enough.
I just wanted to make...
Okay, it is possible. I do have witnesses, so I can substantiate this claim. If necessary, send me an email at contact@dpc.com. We'll send you verification of information. But no, literally what happened is we were at Dave Matthews concert in Berkeley. And we were up in the field, before the grass, but like there's like a little like kind of railing where everybody kind of hangs out. We weren't down in like the pit, and this group of guys that was already clearly feeling themselves kind of rolled in next to us, me and my buddies, and just hanging out, like super cool. And they're like, "Yeah, dude, good to meet you guys." Blah blah blah, super chill. It's a Dave Matthews concert. Everybody's everything.
What year is this? Circa what?
Circa 2014.
Oh, dang.
Maybe.
That's recent history.
Yeah, it's pretty recent history. Okay. It might be 2012.
10 years ago, but
somewhere in there.
Okay.
I'd have to look up the exact year. But I was there with Steve. Do you know Steven Stockland?
No.
Okay, Steven was there. He can verify the story. Mm-hmm. He doesn't exist.
I like how you mentioned a person I also don't know.
Yeah, to substantiate my well, listen, okay. Shout out Steven Stockland. So they're there, they're drinking, they're ordering drinks, they bring us drinks. I'm not a big drinker, but I'm like, obliging, whatever. We went and bought them around, and we were just having fun, and it was Dave Matthews and everybody's vibing, and it's like, it's the funniest thing about a Dave Matthews concert is seeing all of the dads in khakis and tucked in button up shirts just like vibing. Out, like college days. But anyways, I kept looking at this guy. He had a hat, super tight bill hat, low on his face. And I kept looking at him like it was somebody I recognized, but I'm not a big, I've never seen like Pirates of the Caribbean or anything. I'm not like a big Johnny Depp fan. But I knew he looked familiar. He had the dark eyes and I'm like, why does this guy look so familiar? And the whole night I was like, literally, I think he probably thought I was weird because I kept doing the stare at him, trying to put the pieces together.
Yeah.
And it was probably the second to last song it hit me. I was like, I think that's the Pirates guy. And I literally got on my phone and Googled the Pirates of the Caribbean and pulled it up.
Okay. I'm just mad you didn't know his name.
I know.
He's one of the best actors of all time.
Well, listen, that may be true, but I'm more an Amber Heard fan now.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm just kidding. That's not true. I don't know anything
Johnny.
about. I'm sorry, Johnny. I love you.
I'm not Team Amber. Just want you
Listen,
to know.
Johnny, if you see this, I just want you to shout out that you and I did hang out at Dave Matthews. But
you totally remember this.
Yeah, yeah. That's a fair point. So I literally at the end, second to last song, whatever, I realize it's him, or at least I think it is. I'm pretty confident, and I kind of nudge up next to him on the railing, and I'm just like, "Hey, man, are you Johnny Depp?" And he's like, "Yeah." Literally, that was the exchange.
He was like, yeah.
He was literally yeah. Super, super chill. And that was the exchange. And we high-fived and the show ended and that was it. So
I am not someone like Johnny Depp, and neither are you. And I can't remember who I had lunch with last Tuesday. This guy definitely doesn't remember you. And
that's a little hurtful. That's a little hurtful. I like to think that it's somewhat memorable.
That's what I love about these celebrity stories. Hey, I ran into this celebrity, and but then my next question is, did they run into you? Do they remember you?
Yeah, that's fair. But I was with him for 3.5 hours.
It's still cool. No, it's still cool. Yeah, you were beside him.
Okay, now you're just trying to downplay it.
You were like, satellite. And he's just...
Listen, man, Johnny Depp, since then I've become more of a Johnny Depp fan because now we're friends, right?
Yeah, you're bros.
Yeah, we exchanged nothing. But anyways, so, hey, Josh, how's things going in the market, man? How's real estate world?
Well, I mean, it's happening. Real estate never stops. That's the thing. But it's changing. It's evolving. I think every time one part, because real estate's not. What's interesting about it is property's finite. We're not getting any new land.
Right.
I mean, there are countries trying to do that, but I mean, in reality, we're not really getting.
Countries are underwater right now.
Yeah, yeah. So we're here in America. We're not adding any new land, but whenever one segment of the market, let's call it like residential, it doesn't mean that every segment hurts in quite the same way. Like if interest rates go up, it might hurt borrowing power in certain manners. But if the economy is still growing in certain industries and the cash is still flowing, you're going to still have commercial remodels or redevelopment projects, or you're going to have land work being done or storage units being built or something. So there's so many different segments to real estate. That's why I love about it. And if you're kind of all in, eggs in one basket and in one segment, I think you could find yourself twiddling your thumbs.
When did you do your first deal? Like, when did you get into the game? What year?
What kind of deal?
Well, any deal.
My first deal was actually in wholesale. I bought foreclosure wholesale from a bank where we had to do a double close.
Okay.
And that was my first house that I ever bought.
What year was that?
That was in 2007.
Okay, so you and I are in the same boat then, because that's what I was going to ask, because you talk about like the changing times and the evolving.
Yeah.
And so many people, like some of the hate I get on the internet is like, oh, cool, it's another real estate bro that started in 2019 and like made all this money. No, I bought my first deal in 2007. You bought your first deal in 2007. Yeah. We're still sitting here making.
I got into real estate in the worst real estate market, but there was still a market in real estate even at the time when it was at its rock bottom.
Did you know? So I don't know the story, so maybe you can tell the story. Yeah. But like I bought my first real estate deal in November of 2007, and for $252,000, $252,500.
Cool.
And I got my tax assessed value the following April at like something like $89,000. So like I made my very first deal was the worst real estate transaction of my career by far.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not now, but it's up there.
Yeah.
Did you when you bought? But I bought in 2007, not knowing what I did. I just knew that it was good to buy real estate. Did you buy in 2007, knowing that we were coming into a like? Were you aware that the market was
2007, 2008? We were already seeing foreclosures hit.
Okay.
In Cincinnati, I was in Ohio.
So you were a little bit more aware than even I was.
Yeah, and I also didn't have the ability to go buy a $232,000 house at that time.
Sure.
I wasn't already like thick into my career. I was running kind of a startup at that time as a tech business, software company. And so I didn't have a ton of disposable cash. I had a huge interest in real estate and I wanted to get involved, but my barrier to entry was pretty high. So I'm, at this time, I'm like 24 years old, 25 years old. And I'm like, I know I got to get in the market right now as early as possible. And if you're 25, please, like, don't sit and just rent. Like, figure out how to get in the market as an investor. And dude, you don't need your dream house right now. But dude, I'm just saying,
buy.
Sorry, I just had to look at them.
That's good, man.
Like,
tell them,
do it. But I knew that I needed
clip that
to do
right there. Do it.
I needed to get in the market, and so I got into the wholesale side. There was a group that was basically had a partnership with the banks that had foreclosure notes. They wanted to offload them, but they didn't want to deal with it. But if you went into contract with these houses, you had 30 days of closing. You were promising to buy it if you didn't sell it. So what we'd do is we'd grab these notes and go market it to investors who wanted to do flips. And if we couldn't find anyone, that the company had to buy it off the bank. That was the deal, or the bank would stop giving you the deal flow.
Right.
So one came across that I really liked, and I looked at it and I was like, man, I want to buy this. I want to do my first flip. So I wanted to renovate it. It was $32,000 for a 2,000 square foot 5-bedroom house, 3-story. A farmhouse. It was built in 1914.
In Ohio, right?
In Ohio. It was a crack house. Literally was like the drug dealer's house on the street.
Yep.
And they got evicted. And all the neighbors were glad to have them gone. But now it's a vacant house. And it's just adding to the decreased value in the whole neighborhood. So then I got my father-in-law, said, hey, do you want to do this together? He had $32,000. I didn't. I had time. He didn't. It's a great partnership.
Yep.
And we went in on it together. Bought the house for $32,000. I renovated it, and partway through the renovations, I realized I wanted to live there. And so then I bought it off my father-in-law for, we reappraised the house. We were going to split 50-50 the net, on it. So then we valued that, added that to the note. I got a loan and bought it off my father-in-law. That was my first home that I lived in for 7 years.
That's amazing.
Then I ended up selling. So I bought it off my father-in-law for $132,000, which included, so my profit was in my down payment. I didn't have to have a down payment because I had enough equity. And then ended up selling it when I moved here for about $185,000. That helped me be the seed capital to other real estate deals I ended up doing when I moved to California.
So here's what I love the story. Here's what I love about the story, because this is in 2007.
Yeah.
And I think 2007, 2008. And I think most people hear this story and they go, well, must be nice, Josh. It's like all the memes. It's like, I wish I was buying real estate instead of being 7 years old in 2000 and whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But the truth is that strategy still exists today.
Totally.
Right. And so we got a lot of topics we want to cover today, but one of them is talking about the future of the American dream. And I would say arguably the biggest component of the American dream is home ownership.
Yeah.
And, we may have some differing opinions here, but I've been saying for a while that I think the American dream is in danger, at least as it pertains to home ownership. We think about things like, the housing market price increases, interest rate increases, the tightening of lending policies, all of these things, guys, that are coming out of college, even early years into their career are not going to be able to afford a home. And I don't believe that there's any interest from a governmental standpoint in making home ownership more affordable.
Oh no.
I think we pretend like that matters, but the truth is look at other first world countries that have gone to rent control, right? Who owns a house in London? Who owns a house in Sydney? These countries are home ownership is not a part of their dream. It's just it's a rental nation. And I do feel like in 10 or 15 years, candidly, I don't think home ownership will be reachable for the average or even above average American. However, we've talked about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, I think it's easy to just take that information and shut down and go, well, I'm just never going to be able to do it. Right. I don't have the down payment. I don't got the stuff. That's cool for Joshua that he got that $32,000 house in 2007, but it's 2024 now and I can't, I don't got money. I can't do that. There's no such thing as a $32,000 house. And that's really not true. Doing, the deals might be different. The strategy might be different, but if you're 25 years old and you're trying to build something that lasts beyond you today in 2024, how would Joshua Johnson do it?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. One, I didn't understand deal structures. There's so many creative deal structures now too with seller finance. There's a lot of ways to get into a deal if the barrier is really high for you. Having a good solid W-2 is also is really good. If you're starting hey, I'm going to get a career that cash flows for me, that I can live below my means, that W-2 will allow you to get a loan on that, a refi. Let's say you get find a private lender to help you to do it, but then you can refi out because you got a solid W. That's one way to get in the market. There's 100 ways to get in the market. There's another way is partner with a family member that has a little bit of disposable cash, but put them on the title with you so they're protected, and then refi them out. Let's
put it, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's make it as hard as possible. Yeah. Let's just take it all the way to I'm 25. I don't have a W-2. Maybe I don't even have a job. I got, $500 in the bank. And you're telling me, you looked at the camera and said, buy real estate now. How do I do it? How am I going to reasonably do it? From the hardest environment. Because I think, again, what I'm trying to demystify is this idea that you need a ton of money or a great job even. Now, listen, I'm a proponent for a great job. I want people to make good money. I want people to have a stability in their income, but it is not necessarily what predetermines your ability to get into the game.
That's for sure. So here's the thing. I didn't come from money. So the premise that I had to break into the market, not with a ton of cash behind me, but hopefully you have something to bring to the table. Do you have grit? Do you have hard work? Do you have the fortitude and the resourcefulness to go figure out how to solve problems? Do you have the ability to manage a project, people, dollars, budgets? What skills do you bring to the table? Find out how you fit. You don't have to be solo. That's the other thing. I know that you and I are probably a little bit, I've almost partnered in everything in business. I've very rarely done anything solo. But I bring something to the table, and I make sure I bring that really well. I'm not perfect, but I try and bring that to the best of my efforts at the highest level that I possibly have, and I go and get the other resources I don't have, and I partner. So I think that if you have the ability to communicate well, articulate a vision, connect with people, and actually have relational equity that you can build long term, you can build relationships that you can bring something to the table, they bring something to the table, and you each benefit from it. Doesn't mean every deal goes off without a hitch or that there's never any issues, but in the long term, you have to have the long view. And that's the thing that I would just encourage anyone who's getting in the market, look at the long game. Do things today that will set you up for the long game 5 years from now. Because when you look back 5 years from now, you're going to be like, oh, I'm in a way better position. And so I would say if you're 25, you don't have any dollars, but you have a lot of sweat equity, find someone that has dollars, because there's probably someone who's 28 that comes from money. They've got 50 grand and they want to invest. And you're like, okay, we can actually get this, renovate this, get this loan. I actually know this person who would be a first deed of trust to lend on it. Let's manage this together. And maybe, his 50 grand gets him this return plus the split, and this first deed of trust gets their return. And then you guys are splitting the net profit. You're all motivated and aligned with the end outcomes. Get alignment. Find that alignment, whatever you bring to the table. And if you have no money and all you have is sweat equity, are you going to be the bottom rung for the first few deals? Absolutely. But once you build that ability to then be an investor and to have some cash, and you don't go squander it on your, rims on your car or something,
Subwoofers.
Yeah. And you actually say, I'm going to have the long game, and I'm actually going to reinvest in myself because I believe in myself. You're going to be able to multiply that over the next 3, 4, 5 deals. But you got to have that 5-year kind of horizon in order to get there.
Well, and I love that you talk about invest in yourself, because I agree with you, and we're both real estate guys, so we're listening to each other and we're like, yeah, that's how you do it. But like if I'm 20, 25 years old, I don't even know necessarily some of the words you just used. That's actually a really good thing to be aware of, because because here's the thing that's interesting about any asset class, but particularly real estate, is that whether or not you have money does not actually qualify you as a real estate investor. Right. And so the guy that you think has all the money, you assume has all the knowledge, but most often they don't.
No.
And so the best thing you can do as a 20, 25-year-old to prepare yourself to partner with the guy with $50,000, the 28-year-old, the 30-year-old, mom and dad, uncle, whatever, is to go get the knowledge. What's a first deed of trust? How do I find a deal? How do I structure capital? What is a structure? What does that even mean? Right? There's a YouTube is like the ultimate free college, right? Like you can go literally in the next 30 days and educate yourself on the basics of investing that will make you 90% more educated and more informed than the average guy with $50,000 sitting on the sidelines. And so go do that. Like go get the knowledge and then figure out how to partner. The way that we've always told people is like the number one skill in real estate investing, in my opinion, you can tell me if you agree, is deal finding. If you can't find a deal, like you're screwed. Like no amount of money is going to help you find a deal necessarily. But the second greatest skill of real estate investing is learning how to raise capital. I wish somebody would have told me that I needed to start building my private money network way earlier than I did, because I'd be a gazillionaire now, right? The only thing that I've figured out the deal game, I know how to find the deals, but now I just have to manage the capital piece of it. But the cool part about it, to your point, is like the capital. I mean, I did one of my first deals with my parents too. Like there's people in your life that if you display an interest and an effort in learning how to do the thing, they'd be happy to invest in your success. And outcome.
They can't know more than you in most cases. They want to see that you're putting in the effort. They're not going to just give to someone who isn't going to put in the time and put in the effort to invest in themselves. If you believe in yourself and actually you're showing, I'm actually spending a lot of time, unpaid time, because I believe in myself that this is my future, people are way more likely to get behind you, because they always said in the startup world with venture capitalists, they say, I'll invest in a B idea with an A
player
entrepreneur over an A idea with a B entrepreneur. And what is that B entrepreneur versus A entrepreneur? The ability to pivot when things change. I mean, I'm constantly pivoting when the market is adjusting. If I'm in the middle of a construction build and all of a sudden plywood goes to $90 a sheet, what do I do? If I'm in the middle, I'm about to finish one of my spec builds and 8% interest starts to creep up, what do I do? If I'm all of a sudden interest rates are 3% and I can't build fast enough and now I don't have any subs that are available, what do I do? Nothing is easy. Nothing's going to come easy. Nothing's going to be handed to you. It doesn't matter what you watch on YouTube or the things that you listen to from us. You have to see the long game, invest in yourself to be a master, get a master's degree in problem solving, and you're going to find yourself in the long game you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and that's the basis.
That's what investors want.
Yeah.
They want to know you're going to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you'll always have the same, when you put together a pro forma, which is another big word, but you should look it up. But it's part of raising capital.
Yeah.
Your pro forma is never going to be right. No. I think we talked about this last time.
I think we did. Well, and I think that I love it though. And honestly, we could pivot this entire conversation to the capital raising part of the game, because there's so many nuances to understanding investor psychology even, right? Because to your point, like I always tell our students, like you're never going to have 100% of what you need to do anything, right? Like that's why I'm the king of I know a guy. I get in trouble, I know a guy. I don't know the answer, I know a guy. You got a question for me I've never even thought of? Absolutely, because I know a guy, right? I don't have a money problem. I don't even have a knowledge problem. I got a people problem. And as long as I've got the right people, then I know how to solve those gaps. But with raising capital, there's so many elements of going, like, even with investors, like you say, like doing your due diligence and knowing more, like my investors, I tell them all the things that could go wrong. Like, as a new investor, as a new real estate, guy, like a lot of times we want to talk about how it's going to be perfect and we're going to be absolutely on budget and absolutely on schedule and it's just going to be fine. And it actually seeds no confidence into the private money partner because because they've been places you haven't been and they know things you don't know and they see through it and they go, oh, this person is wearing rose-colored glasses. Yeah. So do the work to even learn about the risk. I think one of my pet peeves right now in the real estate guru space is how we're oversimplifying raising capital. Yeah. Because what I think it's doing is it's diluting responsibility. Yeah. And I'm seeing a lot of young guys treating other people's money like some sort of weird piggy bank that they don't have to have responsibility for. And I know you're this way because we've talked about it. I'm this way. Like I lose sleep over my private money. Like, there's times where like I feel, because I treat it like it's my grandma's, right? And I think if I were, as we're talking to in this moment, these new young entrepreneurs that maybe want to get into real estate, on the other side of it, I would want to tell them, like, you need to feel the pressure. Yeah. Like you need to do the work and feel the weight of responsibility, because nobody is going to trust you with their livelihood if they don't believe you care about it as much or even more than they do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of athletes feel this way and a lot of professionals feel this way. If you're wanting to be a professional at something, you want to be an expert in something, I mean, you're really only as good as your last deal. So, you at a grant, if you treat each deal like that, you're like, this is not just about this deal, but this is the long game. I don't want this to be a blemish. I want this to be a story, because not every deal is going to go exactly as planned. Some deals go really smooth. I love those deals.
They're the best.
I can't plan for them, but I love them. We all love them.
Yep.
I mean, those are the deals where we look back, you're like, you're so smart, Josh. Micheal, how did you do that? You are the god of real estate. You're like, and deep down inside, there's God was involved. Yep. A lot of good luck. A lot of things happened and lined up at just the right time. You hit the market perfectly, and you want to think that you planned it out. And it was like, that was all you're doing. That's just not true. I
have a deal right now here in Redding on Alta Mesa that I analyzed as like a 450 to 475 exit and got a 605 appraisal. I didn't expect that.
You were so smart.
I'm so smart. I'm actually working on a line of merch called Real Estate Jesus.
Yeah.
So just subscribe.
Have you seen those shirts where it says "He has risen"? R-I-Z-Z.
No, but I feel like that should be for Risen King.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they did wear. Yes.
Did they wear them?
Yes. But I just love that shirt.
He is risen. He is risen indeed.
Risen.
Riz. Hey, so this is interesting. So we're kind of in the weeds a little bit about like how we structure these deals, but let's back it up and simplify it for a sec. If I'm 25 years old, maybe I don't have a rich uncle or even a well-established mom or dad that can help me or wants to help me.
They don't have to be rich, but yeah.
I don't have somebody with $25,000 to $50,000 even, right?
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe I'm not comfortable to ask them because I don't want that pressure.
Yeah.
Right? There's something that is very popularized, which is ultimately how you got into the game, where you can get into the real estate, build capital, learn the game, learn how to find the deals, and use basically none of your own money.
Correct.
Right? Which is wholesaling.
Correct.
So let's talk, because I think there's a few things to cover here in the wholesale game. But why don't you define wholesaling for us first, and then we'll talk kind of about that strategy as an investment type.
Yeah, wholesaling is essentially you are brokering a piece of paper, between a bank typically or a seller who is willing to offload a property off market to typically an investor who wants to be able to have a high, usually going to pay all cash, going to have a high return on the ARV, which is after repair value, for that property in that neighborhood. They usually are relieving some level of stress or pain or timetable that is important to the seller. And the buyer, the benefit they get is lower cost. The time I got into it, it was with banks who had bad debt. They were going to either write it down or they were going to have to sell it through the wholesale market. And I think that's essentially it's interesting that I started out that way, and then now I'm a real estate agent, so I'm licensed now. I saw the pros and cons of where that market is going. I think that wholesaling is always going to exist because there's always going to be off-market types of things. There are agents that are going to say, hey, that's completely illegal. There's things like that. I think there are elements of it that I'm less concerned with the legalities of it, where you and I may or may not differ because we haven't had in-depth conversations about this, but I'm in the state of California with how litigious we are. I am more concerned about the long-term exposure for buyer, seller, and a kind of wholesale person in the middle with the level of contracts I see being passed around in the wholesale community. Knowing that a lot of the disclosures and documents that we do as an agent here in California are all related to a previous lawsuit that won in the court. And so without those proper disclosures, without those things involved, I think there's exposure. The question is how much exposure is each person willing to take, and have? And that's just like an insurance question.
Right. And how much exposure is applied to each party? Because my argument is that the exposure generally isn't on the wholesaler, right? The exposure is potentially on the seller and the end buyer, right? Because the wholesaler is the transactor of paper. He's the middleman. So just to be clear, if I were going to wholesale a property, I would go to Joshua and I would buy, I'd say, hey, I see you've got this property. Can I buy it for $200,000? It's worth $500,000. Right. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense because I've got some reason that I'm willing to trade my price for speed and convenience, probably.
Right.
And so then I go take that to, Micheal, end buyer, and I go, hey, I've got this property that's worth $500,000. Can I sell it to you for $250,000? And Micheal, end buyer, goes, absolutely, that's a great deal for me. And Micheal, Johnny, the wholesaler in the middle, makes the spread between the $200,000 price I paid the seller and the $250,000 price that I paid.
So I agree with you. The part where I get hung up, and not really hung up, but I mean, the part where I realized when I jumped into this and I was doing wholesaling as a 25-year-old, I knew nothing.
Sure.
I knew nothing. Recently, I was going through a wholesale deal with someone who was trying to wholesale. They were similar to me. They're young. They don't know very much. And they're like, hey, I got this wholesale deal. It's going to be like $20,000, $15,000 to $20,000 max to to do this. I walked it. I was like, great, go take some video, walk it. I had a buyer potentially. It was an institution. I was going to do sober living and some different things like that.
I know about this deal.
And when I ended up going to the inspection, the thing's a darn near teardown. It's a 75 to 100,000 remodel, but it's not that person's fault.
No,
it really isn't. It was, they were just like I was when I got into this market. They just didn't know. And what I can see is that if it wasn't an institution that had someone on their team that had my background to protect them from purchasing that, or at least call that out and try and reshape them. We tried to renegotiate with that seller. It was fine. It didn't end up working out for now, but maybe down the road it will. We needed to adjust the price to account for the extra cash that would be needed and all of that. But long and short of it is that I think the wholesaler would be potentially liable, and the seller, if an unsophisticated buyer purchased that, thinking that there was 15 to 20,000 in remodels, and they get into it, and a contractor after closing says, dude, your entire house is got wood rot. You have standing water underneath the house. There's mold under there. The roof was done by Uncle Bob, and there's a shed hanging off of the side of the house acting like an attached, this thing is not $20,000. And all of a sudden they go, what? That's what I was told. So I think what happens is a wholesaler can't be quiet during a deal because you're talking to humans. And everything you say, every email exchange, every thing you estimate or you think can be an exposure.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, and by the way, we're also talking about a broader problem within the wholesale community, which is some of it is innocent ignorance,
totally,
right? To your point, right? Like, I just don't know what I don't know. But there's a lot of it that's just straight up deceitful sales practices. Right.
And then I think in this case, this wholesale guy is the most integrous guy. I mean,
for sure.
Such a good guy. But there are people that are bad actors out there that probably give it a pretty bad name.
Wholesale's got a terrible name. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I started teaching. It's ironic that we teach wholesalers because I don't wholesale. Like, it's not my game. I'm a buy and holder, or I fix and flip. We wholesale occasionally.
But it's a deal flow for the stage of real estate you're in.
It's a deal flow for me. But the primary reason why we developed that kind of training program was so that I could deal with wholesalers that understood the game the way that I play it, not understood it the way that it's happening out in the eco. Dude, it is the wild. If you want to go have some fun for an afternoon as an attorney or something, go jump into a wholesale Facebook group and see what's going on.
Yeah.
But my point is, I look at that and I go, well, there's a couple of things. One, pretty much all the contracts are buyer to verify, right? So if a wholesaler, and I agree with you, and I tell the wholesalers all the time, you're thinking, I tell my students, I go, you need to not think like a wholesaler right now. You need to think like a buyer. Because wholesalers are always going to overestimate ARV and underestimate repairs, because that creates the biggest spread for them to make money in the deal. But in the event that they don't do that, I think a couple of things are true. And again, I haven't experienced a lawsuit on it. So knock on wood. But for me, I go, in the contracts, it's very clear that the buyer has to verify that the property is as is, that that we don't have, reasonable disclosures available. The buyer is to verify whatever they're verifying. So that's one element of the wholesale contract, or at least it should be if it's not being utilized. The second element of it, though, is the fact that it's, in the wholesale space, you're not typically dealing with a homestead buyer. You're typically dealing with an investor, right? And if they're not sophisticated enough to identify, analyze, and look at their own kind of project, to me, that's on due diligence, not on the wholesaler.
Yeah, and I agree in some part on that. I totally agree, and because I was on the wholesale side, and I've actually bought wholesale, before. So I totally agree that it can be. There are just so many different things. There's a reason why the errors and omissions, even in the perfect real estate world where you got all the disclosures and everything, there's still mediation that happens and lawsuits that happen.
Certainly.
I think the reason why it doesn't happen more in the wholesale market is typically a wholesaler is a young, I've got no money something, and what are you going after? their like Honda Civic. Like, what are you?
Sure.
No offense, but I mean, there's nothing to go after. So I don't think you see as many lawsuits because of that. But it's still kind of a weird part of the industry. So they're probably not as exposed because of their status. If they were a millionaire or it was an institution that was doing wholesale, I think then you would have something to go after. If there were like a class action of deals or something like that,
sure.
You would see junior lawyers trying to make a name for themselves in Southern California, finding a class action of like, if you bought your house from a wholesaler and it was the institution like this, like if it was that, I think it would be different because
Sure.
it would regulate it.
Yeah, but it's interesting because there are huge institutions wholesaling, and I haven't heard of any class action lawsuits against the wholesale as an industry. So it's an interesting point.
But some states are making it illegal for a reason, I think, because I believe things are going into the courts. And that's the interesting thing about this NAR settlement. And I think it's an opportunity for wholesalers. It'll thin the crop, but I think it's an opportunity for some wholesalers to become experts and actually still make the same spread because there's no limit on the amount of commission you can take. Everyone thinks it's 6%. But if you're wholesaling a deal off market and you're a buyer representative, you now are covered and protected under E&O, errors and omission insurance, and you can still, as a buyer representative, charge the same spread now under all of the protections that you get from a licensor.
So let's talk about that because there's actually two topics there that are really interesting. One of which, of course, is the big bad NAR settlement, which is worthy of discussion.
National Association of Realtors.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other piece you just said is it's like, well, that's why states are making wholesale illegal. That's interesting because
I'd say that there's a correlation possibly there. I wasn't saying exactly why. I'd have to look at those cases. But
yeah. And I would say like they're trying to. I think it's fair to say that they're trying to. Now, the interesting thing, and we can talk about most recently the states that I think the first state was to create legislation to regulate wholesaling was Indiana. But now there's a number of states that have wholesale regulations. And to kind of not to over legalese the topic, it's important to understand why, because the argument against wholesaling real estate is that the brokering of real property requires a license. And so the big argument in wholesale is whether or not doing a wholesale transaction is indeed brokering real estate. And in most states, it's viewed as, or historically it's been viewed as, no, it's not. It's not the brokering of real property. It's the brokering of a contract, right? I'm selling paper. I'm not actually transacting real estate, which I think is another reason why the liability is potentially reduced, because the viewpoint on it has not been tied to the disclosure of the property. It's been more about the assignment of the contract.
Sure.
But now we've had recently Virginia, Ohio, I believe. Virginia for sure, and Oregon has rolled out new legislation basically trying to redefine. They're not making wholesale illegal. They're
Right.
trying to redefine wholesale as the brokering of real estate.
Right.
And so the conversation that's come up now is like, well, what does that mean? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, well, in order for you to wholesale a real estate deal, you need to have your real estate license. Well, listen, at the end of the day, first of all, the laws are written really poorly, like clearly written by people that don't understand the wholesale industry. So like they're written in such a way that the loopholes are aplenty. But the bigger conversation is everybody's panicking about it, going like, well, what are we going to do? They're making it illegal. The market's shrinking down. No, they're not.
Yeah.
But what it is going to do is, in the same way that the conversation we're having around the NAR settlement is, it's going to thin the herd. It's actually an opportunity for legitimate wholesalers. And I think that's the point you're making.
Yeah.
It's less about whether or not wholesaling is dangerous or not dangerous, or like legal or not. It's more about like, are you doing the work to conduct your business right and ethically and according to the law?
Yeah. Well, what I like about it is if we could, one of the things that I could be like pro standardizing a real estate transaction, whether it's the paper of a transaction or the assignment of a transaction or the transaction itself, is I think that it'll allow more buyers, not just the rich, to get into the market. Like I wasn't rich when I got in the market, and wholesaling was the way that I could get in at a low barrier to entry with a seller that was willing to sell below market value. It allowed me to get in sooner. I want to see more 25-year-old Joshes being able to get in the market. I do. Yeah. I think standardizing and actually licensing the wholesaler is one of the pathways, because I'm going to feel protected as an unsophisticated investor, being able to get into the market, knowing there's error and omission, there's going to be right disclosures. The seller does not need a listing agent, so they still get out of a deal without paying a listing fee. But the buyer is already, like they were before with wholesale, paying the wholesaler, right? Mm-hmm. Now the wholesaler is just licensed as a buyer representative, and they can make whatever spread they want. If on this deal they decided that on a $200,000 deal they're going to make $20,000, they're going to make 10% commission, they're allowed to. Yeah. That's just between them and their buyer rep if their buyer is willing to pay for it. So all of that just brings that up to the surface and say, you got me an off-market deal. I don't care if the seller is paying commission. I'm going to pay you because you got me this off-market deal because this house is worth $275,000. Of course, I'm going to pay you $20,000. Thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't have known this without you.
Well, so it's going to be interesting because here's what I'm hearing you say, which I do agree with. I don't know if I have said this, that if you're stressed about it, go get your freaking license. Like, I'm not going to go get my real estate license because I don't see a big enough upside for me, and I can the few transactions I wholesale a year, like, it just doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm comfortable with where I'm at. But if I were like going like, I'm going to be a wholesaler, like this is my business, I'd just go get my license.
Yeah.
And I think what it does is it raises the bar of disclosure, therefore raising the bar of ethics. Yeah. Because I think the bigger issue in wholesale, as a guy who buys from wholesalers predominantly, so I love wholesalers, even though most of them suck. The biggest issue is...
But not you.
Yeah, not you, no. Just all the other ones but you. But the biggest issue isn't anything, it's the ethics. The ethics can be debated, but at the end of the day, if I'm slipping anything under the radar, it's call for question ethically. And I think that's what you're describing, is getting licensed, being subjected to a broker, because that would be the other piece of this thing that would have to be worked out. I'd have to hang with a broker that was letting me do this. Yep. And there's a lot of brokers that will not allow wholesaling.
Well, they wouldn't call it wholesaling anymore. You're a buyer rep. Sure. So that's what it's going to be. This whole thing, moving everyone, the NAR settlement actually it paves a way for this, because it used to be you would represent a buyer without a buyer rep agreement ahead of time, or like it would just be whatever was posted as the MLS, posted, buyer rep commission, or they call it the selling commission. That was how buyer reps were getting paid. It was a cooperative agreement through the MLS and through the listing agreement with the seller. If the seller is off market, they don't have a listing agreement with anyone, so they don't have a fiduciary looking out for their best interest. They've chosen that. That's why they're doing off market. Maybe they got a house that won't be financeable, right? Something like that. Or, they know that they live in a neighborhood that most FHA lenders would not lend on, or something of that nature. They need to just sell. They need to get the cash out now. They might go through a buyer rep that specializes in finding off-market investors that would buy that property, and that seller doesn't care how much you're making off of it.
So you see this as an opportunity for almost a new niche within the market to emerge.
Totally. I think there's going to be buyer reps that used to wholesale that now will wear a badge and be licensed, protected under E&O, under a broker, and they're going to know the investor network. They're going to be the same people. They're going to build an investor network that will buy these off-market deals, and they're going to still go and source those deals the same way and actually have the coverage of...
Okay, so I love this. I hadn't thought of it this way. And so here's what I love about this, because it also works both ways. Because right now you've got a whole lot of agents. So let's back up for just a second. Yep. What was the NAR settlement? Like, what's the noise about in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, really, really quick is that their buyer reps, basically sellers are not going to be forced to pay a buyer commission, and it cannot be posted on the MLS ahead of time. So if you're representing a buyer, you need to have a buyer rep agreement before you go show the house or the property. And your agreement is with them as the buyer, that they're willing to pay you direct. You can negotiate that fee to be paid by the seller, which deals might happen that way. If it's a seller's market or a buyer market, it might change how you structure your deal. But at the end of the day, if the seller won't pay your commission, you have an agreement here with your buyer to pay your commission. So now buyer reps are going to have to prove their value, their worth, because they're going to have to not just be, because typically if you wanted to buy a home, you're like, hey, Josh, help me go look at 5 homes. It was no skin off your back if you didn't find one, or if you did find one, you weren't paying me. You're just like, I was just your agent, but the seller was paying me.
Right.
And it was just automatic.
Yep.
Automatic. That's not automatic anymore. So in a nutshell, it opens up the door for now a whole new kind of industry of expert buyer agents who actually are going to niche themselves into different markets. I believe they're going to get specialized, and it's going to thin the herd of all these agents that do 1 or 2 deals a year, or they just do it on the side or whatever like that. They're not going to be able to get that automatic commission for helping you find that house.
There's so many interesting questions on this topic, because like we could talk about the implication for the buyer's agents, we can talk about, but since we're talking about wholesalers, because here's the thing that's so weird to me about the whole thing is it's like, what stops me from just so you're the listing agent, I set up my buyer agreement, whatever, but what stops me from just calling you and going, hey, what are you paying the buyer's agent, even though it's not on the MLS? Like, why can't I just call you and ask you what it is?
Or you would say, is your seller willing to pay the buyer agent? You can call, people will call. They may or may not. They may say, as a listing agent, my seller hasn't decided, put it in the offer and we'll decide. Because what it may come down to is if one offer is the same, they're both $300,000 offers, and one says my buyer is paying the commission direct to their agent, and the other offer is requesting the seller to pay, well, that's a $15,000 difference.
Yeah.
So then, you've got the math checks out where one is $15,000 lower. So it's another lever that you can use to negotiate to make sure you win that house. Or if it's in a buyer's market, to make sure you don't have to pay for it and that it gets absorbed. There's already lenders that are trying to, the lending market's going to change too. How are these fees going to get absorbed into a loan?
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for them? There's going to be so many different ways, but now it's just going to be more upfront. We're going to see the cost, and so it's not going to be automatic, which I think overall is going to be good for the buyer.
Yeah.
It's good for the consumer. The industry will up its game because now you're going to have people that have to fight for their value. So that means you're actually going to have good agents in the market.
Oh, God forbid.
And if you've seen bad wholesalers, I've seen bad agents. So
I'm sure we could compare horror stories of the both. And I agree with you. And I mean, ultimately, time will tell how this plays out. Because like people are like, well, this is, buyers are going to suffer. And then people are like, well, sellers are going to suffer. And I'm like, no, I think what will happen is like the market will find its way to correct this in a way that makes it still equitable.
Well, because the first people you got to protect are first-time home buyers.
Sure.
If they now think they're going to go to direct to the listing agent now and get a better deal, or be just as protected as they would if they had a buyer agent, they're wrong. Sadly, they're wrong. And what you're going to see is a lot of double-ended deals for a little while. And I think the state of California and other states might go this route, if they haven't already, is eliminate or make illegal double-ending a transaction.
Oh, you think?
I think it's going to move that way because with this buyer representation, they don't want to expose the most vulnerable buyers even more so, because that listing agent does not have a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer. They have it to the to the seller.
So they'd have to officially self-represent in order to...
Well, who's going to write the offer? So they're going to ask the listing agent, write the offer for me. They're going to go to the open house.
No, they'd have to write their own offer, and then...
They won't, though. Yeah. They're going to ask the listing. What happens today is they'll ask the listing agent, and they'll double end, they call it. Yeah. So they're going to represent both sides. That listing agent, though, does not have the responsibility to protect the buyers as much as they do the sellers. So all of a sudden, this first-time home buyer is really in a weaker position.
Yeah.
And they don't have the same negotiating power. So
and I think I had this debate with a lender locally recently about whether or not, because I actually just think the banks will develop some sort of solution to finance the buyer commissions.
Yeah.
And, everybody's saying emphatically, no, that won't happen. But then we just saw the response from Fannie Freddie saying that they're not going to view the credit as a typical credit. They're going, you know what I mean? So we're already moving in that direction. And I think it's equitable and I think it's fair. And I think that's fine. What I'm fascinated by, though, is this idea of creating a new niche within the market, because I have said historically, like, hey, if you're wholesaling, because it can go, in my mind, when I think about it that way, you can actually see this benefit the other way, because I don't know why more real estate agents don't wholesale.
Right.
It's just as much work, if not more work, to get a new listing as it is to go get an off-market, opportunity at a discount.
Well, it might make the industry just even more above the surface. I think it might elevate it, where there will be certain agents that say, oh yeah, I didn't know. Most agents though don't think about that. Most agents that enter the market as a real estate agent licensor, they're just thinking about their 2.5%, their 3% commission on typical deals. So I think that's going to change. I think there's going to be certain agents and people that are in the wholesale market that get licensed. They're going to say, dude, there's an entire market out here of people that need to sell. I know how to go get them. But I think with most agents, especially if you entered in 2020 and you started becoming an agent, you were just getting all these leads from Zillow and from Realtor.com, from the MLS, from your broker. It was so easy because it was such high demand.
Yeah.
And so I think that gone are those days where it's just going to be easy money. You're going to make 10, 15 grand on a transaction, and you didn't really have to be that smart. You didn't really have to do very much. You just had to push paper. Oh no, sorry. You had a transaction coordinator. All you had to do is shake hands, smile, kiss babies. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you close a deal. I think you're going to actually have to become a really good agent. And whether or not you want to niche into wholesale or you want to do it for seniors or relocation people, you're going to become an expert in something if you want to stay in this game.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I hope that, I say this all the time, the most real estate agents are not real estate experts. And that's a problem, right? Just as much as most wholesalers don't know how to wholesale, right? It's a problem. And so I think that these types of things are going to raise the standard and raise the challenge, right? It's going to be harder, to your point, there's too many people making easy money. And I agree with that. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple of quick, just rapid fire, agree or disagree. You can give a little context if you need to, but I'll tell you my opinion, and I'll say agree or disagree. I do not believe home ownership will be a part of the American dream in 15 years. Agree or disagree?
Disagree.
Okay. You want to give any context?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's going to change. Okay. I think that the American dream is going to evolve. I think that we'll see lower percentages of home ownership, but because of what we talked about, that government, especially the California government right now, which we're fighting against this, the California Association of Realtors fights hard and lobbies hard for home ownership and fighting for that. Well, that home ownership, as long as we have organizations that at a massive level are lobbying for pro home ownership and private property ownership, I think that we'll be able to stay afloat. But I do think the American dream is changing. It will not look the way it did for our parents. It won't look the way it did for us. I think that if you're entering the market here, you're 20 years old to 30 years old. I think finding house hacking opportunities, I believe we're going to see more houses with junior ADUs and ADUs, three kitchens on one property. We're going to at least see seniors moving in the backyard in an ADU in a cute one bedroom with their kids in the front. We're going to see people doing additions onto their houses. I think accessory dwelling units is what ADU stands for. Essentially what that means is you're adding another kitchen to your property for another family to live with without changing the zoning to multifamily. You're still single family zoning with an accessory dwelling unit on the same property. So there's less regulations. You might have to add another meter. You may not have to add another meter if it's attached. There's a lot of different things there. I think people are going to have to build differently. The new construction down the pike, whether you're a public builder or you're a private builder like myself, you need to build with that in mind. Get out ahead of the game and know where the market is moving. The American dream is changing. 10 to 15 years, if people are not owning homes, then we're losing power and the ability to fight for home ownership. And state of California wants to own. They want you to own nothing and be happy about it. Mm-hmm. We got to fight against that thinking because private property and homeownership goes back to the core and the foundation of this country. Mm-hmm. So we don't need to fight for the old American dream. We need to fight for an American dream in what it means for our country today, because costs can determine that. The cost of construction, the cost of property, it's a finite resource. The market changes. You've got different regulations, whether it's energy calcs, like here in California, our energy regulations add probably about $25,000, $30,000 to each property, your infrastructure costs, your drainage, your all this stuff. We start finding out like, oh, homes flood and we have seismic issues and we have earthquakes, so we need this and this and this. So costs have gone up, which is going to make it harder and the barriers are going to be tougher. But if you, with offsetting laws and policies like the accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, it actually makes it pencil. For instance, you're 25 years old, 30 years old, and you have two good jobs. You don't have any kids yet, and you don't need a lot of bedrooms. Mm-hmm. And guess what? You have friends that are renting right now. Mm-hmm. Or you have parents that actually are empty nesters because you were the last kid. Mm-hmm. And they're willing to move to where you are.
Yeah,
you can have a house hack situation where you live in a 2-bedroom house and you have a junior ADU or an ADU, and all of a sudden you've got a cash flowing property paying your mortgage while you're living there, and you could live in a new construction home. This is the kind of project I'm looking at into the future, is like when we build, we got to build for this, because that's the only way it's going to be accessible. And on a property like that here now in 2024, you can get rents on a 2-2 with a studio and a 1-1, 3 kitchens, between $4,000 and $4,500 a month.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And ultimately, like, philosophically, I agree with you. Like, logistically, I think that that's going to be the next phase, is house hacking and multi-generational living. I'm just not as optimistic that the outcome is going to be a victory for that fight. I agree that we should fight for that. I agree in the idea. But for me, I look at it and I go, I don't see, because to me, I think what will happen is the political capital will realize that they get more political control over being able to, because they get more control if we don't own. They get rent control. And if they can control housing, they can control voter opinion.
Absolutely.
And so, like, there's things of these, and we're already seeing this in markets like New York and San Francisco. And like, so I look at this thing and I go, I agree with you in theory. And maybe it's not 15 years, maybe it's 30 years, but and only time will tell.
But I think this is the reason why our generation, so whether an exennial or older millennial, we're stepping into leadership. Millennials are stepping into leadership. And we need to get involved in your local government. This is why I do dip my toe in the political sphere, is because somebody's got to be fighting for those good things. But don't try and fight for things that are gone. Like, it's not just nostalgia.
Sure.
But we need to fight for private property ownership. We need to fight for the ability to have a home and to have a fence and to have something that is yours, right? And that it's not just government owned. Can you live in government owned property or subsidized property for a time being while you're getting on your feet? Absolutely. Are projects like that valuable? Absolutely. Do they grossly overspend on those projects? Absolutely. And when I look at the math, I go, oh my gosh, this is our taxpayer dollars. But we got to be equally fighting for the opportunity for people to get into a home, to be able to stay in a home longer, and I think that multi-generational and these house hacking is going to be the way. What I want to see is them become the standard, but we need to influence the public builders this way. We need to influence planning departments to think this way. We need to influence state governments to actually see that all developers are not bad and just trying to prey on the weak.
So here's my compromise then with you.
Okay.
Here's my compromise. I will continue to lobby with you. I'll continue to fight and stand behind the cause of political figurehead Joshua Johnson, fighting for private home ownership.
Yes.
And in the meantime, I'm going to own as much land as I possibly can, because if it doesn't work, my kids are still going to have an opportunity because I did it now. And that's my attitude on it. Is going like, hey, listen, and this is where we started the podcast, buy now. And I would say this, and agree or disagree. Here's a simple one you don't need to give context for, because I think we agree. The best time to buy real estate in the next decade is today.
Absolutely.
The best time to buy real estate in the next 5 years is today.
Yep.
Okay.
The best time to party with Johnny Depp is now.
Is now. The time is now.
I just had to
Johnny,
bring that back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One last agree or disagree, and then we'll wrap. I've been saying since like Q4 of last year, and it just continues to feel truer and truer, but we'll see if you agree. That's a little shout out to me being right, just in case anybody was wondering. But rates are going to come down in the fall, if not at all. Meaning that I don't see any rate cuts until the fall. I don't actually think the election's going to have as big of an impact as we hoped or thought. And and if they do come down, I don't think that the analysts that have been screaming for 300 basis point drops are going to be anywhere in the realm of reality. I think we're going to see 0.25% here or there. And any meaningful rate drops, I believe, will happen on the back half of 25. What are your thoughts? Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Okay.
I actually think I would not put rate drops in the fall. I'm going to use the word new normal.
Yeah.
I think we're in a new normal, and I think that we're years away from having policies that will spur on enough development to catch up with the housing supply shortages that we have. And the reasons people think prices are going to drop in homes is unfounded. And you'll see a deal here or there when you get a desperate person that needs to move for reasons that are not market driven.
Right.
That's fine. That's not a trend, though. Mm-hmm. So I would be watching the trends. I think that house prices are going to stay. I think we're going to see a lot more people stay in their homes longer, renovate their homes, because finally they're just going to be like, well, instead of moving to that next new home, I'm going instead of a move up property, I'm going to stay where I'm at, and I'm going to renovate instead, because we're not seeing job growth dwindle. We're not seeing unemployment go up. We're not seeing necessarily incomes change. The market's holding steady right now. That may change, and then all of this conversation changes, right? Sure. But right now we're seeing a housing shortage. We're not oversupplied like '07. We don't have unregulated lending practices. We don't have we've got a tightening up of things that usually make the market volatile. And what we're seeing right now is probably a new normal for a couple of years. I think that until the feds and the states come up with ways to incentivize builders, you will not see interest rates drop. And also, until right now, our economy is still growing. There's a lot of things I don't get about all of those numbers, right? Sure. But I agree.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think that's the point, is just I've said it this way, that 2024 into 2025 is going to be boring in terms of real estate.
It feels like a holding pattern. Yeah. And I think that if you want to get moving while in holding, build something that people can rent.
Or learn how to find the deals.
Or learn how to find the deals that people are really excited about.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say, and I'll just close with this idea, because I agree with you that the future of dealing with the housing shortage, which by the way is radically under 2007. I think in 2007 we had 4.5